Hello, thank you for joining us for this webinar. Today we're going to talk about customer lifecycle analytics and maximizing retail ROI. Just want to advance my slide here. There we go. So my background, my name is Chris Engstrom. I'm the Director of Advanced Analytics and Machine Learning at eCapital Advisors. My background, I started out building predictive models right out of college in the direct marketing industry, and then went on to Microsoft, worked out there for 8 years in Seattle in various quantitative roles. Moved back to Minneapolis where eCapital Advisors is based. I love technology and started working at Medtronic, worked there for 8 years. My last position there was Director of Advanced Analytics. Then did some analytics consulting on my own for a while. Spent a year at a medtech startup before I came to eCapital to further advance their data science practice. So today I want to talk briefly about some concepts around ROI, customer lifetime value, and really competitive advantage. If we think about driving ROI in an organization, it's more sophisticated than some may think. And I'm going to talk about how establishing an ROI and customer lifetime value framework framework around the customer lifecycle is most important for these kinds of tools. So when we talk about the customer lifecycle, you think about your customers. You acquire a prospect. You get them to buy. You then develop them as a customer. At some point, they leave you. So there is this kind of standard customer lifecycle framework that really is kind of the foundation of building tools to drive ROI with customer lifetime value and so on. Customer lifetime value is a concept that's been around for quite a while. Basically, the idea is to say, for every single customer, what is the revenue we can expect from that customer over a specified time period? And depending on your business, it could be that time period could vary. But the idea is once you've established the expected revenue over the time period, you can then actively decide how much you want to invest in that customer from an expense standpoint, from a marketing expense standpoint, from a customer support, technical support standpoint. So you make sure that you are making money on that customer and you are getting an ROI on that customer. Because as you may know, there's research out there to suggest up to 20% of a company's customers actually lose money for them because they're needy, they chew up customer support, technical support, and actually they can become a negative CLV or negative ROI customer. And then analytics and data science. So analytics and data science are, in my mind, primarily about competitive advantage. They're about using these tools to make you either your operation more efficient or your business investments and activities more effective. We talk to clients who talk about their competitive set locally, where they're feeling pressure of their competitive peers using machine learning and data science and analytics to kind of advance what they're doing. And so it is about not just gaining a competitive advantage, but as data science and analytics continue to emerge, will become essentially table stakes for competing. So these things all come together to kind of say, we need to be on top of these things to really start thinking about driving ROI. So what this means is, this is a very exciting time for retail. It's an exciting time for any business. As we've all witnessed, technology is now pervasive in our lives, most notably through our mobile devices. But if we think about, the intentional and contextual targeting that's available through search and social media now, through our mobile phones, it's really astonishing the targeting that is available. In the past, if you ever asked, CEOs or executives, what are their most important assets, I think most would say their people, and that's absolutely true. But I think we've come to a point today, witnessed by what internet titans, Silicon Valley titans of Amazon, Netflix, Google, Facebook have established that data are strategic assets. And this is not just, for internet titans. it is about every organization in every industry. In most cases, data are now, becoming strategic assets. Data science is happening now and fast. I mean, I've been doing data science since the early 90s and kind of been waiting for this moment to happen. And I can tell you, I followed this space every day of my life, and I can tell you the last 2 years, I can feel it happening. Not just happening in the leading industries that have adopted these technologies early, such as technology, finance, financial, and insurance, and so on. But we're starting to see other sectors such as retail really starting to transform. And as we see that transformation, we see resource allocation org structures that are changing. So companies are changing the way they organize themselves to adopt these trends. If you look at marketing, just the function of marketing was essentially detonated and blown up and reassembled in the last 10 years, 15 years. And the days of, just running frequency radio and print and television, those days have transformed considerably with mobile-based search and social media targeting. So it's an exciting time for retail, as it is for most industries. So if we want to talk about customer life cycle and the framework, it all really kind of begins with customer acquisition. And smart customer development actually begins with acquisition, because you actually want to be acquiring customers who have potential to be developed and have potential to drive lifetime value and ROI. Now, my experience, I've been buying men's clothing for a long time, and honestly, I'm mystified with the retail experience that I have. I find I'll register for a men's clothing website online and give them my email to register, and that day they're sending me email, and every day from that day they're pummeling me with emails, immediately ruining the experience I'm having with this brand. We'll find, unsubscribes that take me to a website that I have to enter my email again to unsubscribe. And by the way, it's not built for the mobile form factor. It's just, this bad customer experience from the beginning that I just see very often. When I think of this, I think of if I'm dealing with this kind of customer experience early on as a prospect with a clothing retailer, my sense is that they're just driving a customer acquisition machine that is really not integrated into a full customer development program. That's what I would say are the signs of this. But customers today are way more savvy than they were, and they're not willing to put up with this kind of thing. And so, they have mobile devices in their hands that have incredible amounts of information around product reviews, product ratings, and so on. And so, the customer today is much more savvy. And maybe this is just my experience, or maybe my customer lifetime score out there is negative, so I'm not given the attention I should get. But the idea here is that smart acquisition, like what I mean by that is customer acquisition that has a plan in terms of how it is one component of a full customer development program is key for driving a customer lifetime value program and driving ROI. So when we think about your customers are essentially a customer database, and this is a living asset. If you think about, your customer database, it's not something that's static. Every day you have customers that are coming into the database, and every day you have customers that are leaving you through attrition. And so it is it's this living and breathing asset that needs to be monitored, maintained, and the health of this asset must be monitored and maintained. Think about brands. I mean, if a company is not out there actively defining, reinforcing their brand on a regular basis, the market will default to defining that brand. Same thing is with the customer asset. You have to be constantly kind of developing it and monitoring the health of it. We'll talk a little bit about that. There's research Bain did some research showing that it costs 5 times more to acquire a new customer than it is to develop an existing customer. And increasing retention rates by 5% can increase profit by 25 to 95%. This is powerful information. If I look at these data and I think about all the data I've seen over my career, absolutely makes sense. So, driving ROI is about optimizing the insight, these data assets you have, and the value that flows through this, not just your customer database, but the customer lifecycle. So let's look at an example here, or a concept. Basically, what you're doing is you're pathing customers. Customers are not all the same, and they have different values. So you want to have kind of a plan to path them through your organization, through your framework as you develop them as customers. And so when we think about attrition, let's use an example of a men's clothing retailer. They may have what's called pre-segmentation, where they've done some analysis in the past and they kind of know how customers differ from the acquisition standpoint. In this case, it could be source, like so the pre-segment 1 is they were acquired from an online mobile source. 2 in the store, 3 maybe from an outlet. And the idea here is that there's already some structured insight around this that is useful for the retailer to kind of develop the customers. This could be something else. It could be the cohort. I mean, if you have Q1, Q2, Q3 cohorts as customers come in, those cohorts can actually vary in terms of how they perform as customers. But whatever it is, in this case, we'll use the source as an example, channel source. So once those customers come in, we want to capture anything that's available in terms of that acquisition. Any information that we can use later to model, build predictive models, or understand the customers better. But the idea is when a prospect or lead comes in, it's kind of hard to kind of segment them or produce a customer lifetime value on them early because we don't know much about them in terms of how they're interacting with our products and so on. So one option is to have what's called a qualification period. So they're actually they're a customer, but we're observing them and we're maybe even testing them with different offers or messaging or engagement to understand eventually kind of what kind of customer what potential they have for us. And then those can then feed into an existing segmentation we've built on our more established customers. And so if you think about segmentation is more strategic as opposed to targeting. So if we have a lot of customers, we can't treat every one of them on a one-to-one basis. But what we do through cluster analysis and various techniques, we can find segments that amongst themselves are very similar but are very different from the other segments. For example, you may have customers that routinely are buying low-ticket items, right? And then you may have customers that are very erratic with their purchase behavior. They're buying very different product category mixes and so on. And then a third segment might be customers who are buying big-ticket items on an annual basis or something like that. But very different customers, very different customer patterns and behaviors, requiring a segmentation to say, we have limited resources in our company. We want to, but we want to customize. We can't customize to every single customer, but we want to customize to these segments. Our marketing investments, our messaging, even product development for segments. So this becomes more strategic as opposed to very targeted social media, intentional search kind of targeting. And what we're doing here, so if we talk about segmentation as being, optimizing resource allocation of our marketing operations and support resources. But most importantly, and pretty much data science is about looking for useful variance in data. And so what this segmentation is doing is giving us useful variance that we can act upon to then start developing this customer framework, customer lifetime value, and ROI. So if we look at our segments, within each segment, we then develop a customer understanding and look at the customer profile of each segment, and those will differ. And so if we look at, we can collect all the information we can or we find important from a retail standpoint on our segments from, their CL, customer lifetime value, their incremental sales, marketing spend, contact history, average order, things like this. And then we move in to say, okay, now we can kind of produce a customer lifetime value calculation for these segments. Now, customer lifetime value, there's many ways to calculate. You really want to kind of customize it to your business, especially around the term you're looking at in terms of predicting expected revenue. But the idea is this is kind of the foundation for what we're really trying to do, which is customer development. So once we acquire customers and prospects, our job is to maximize now their lifetime value, their ROI. We do that through upsell, cross-sell, and retention efforts. And so these two slides have kind of demonstrated how, these things fit together as opposed to just running a mindless acquisition machine that is accumulating low-source leads that can't be developed, to developing something that all fits together. And so by the time we value these customers and segments, we're able to do some really smart upsell, cross-sell, and retention. If you think about higher education has a problem with running an acquisition machine. There's a lot of pressure for amongst mid-tier education institutions that are really desperate for new students, and they'll do all sorts of things to drive student seats in butts, or butts in seats to the freshman class, but then to find out that those kids aren't a good match for their school, and then they leave or transfer early. So who you bring in needs to be very thoughtful in terms of what you're going to develop. So this is something, when we come back to the concept of this asset, this is a living asset, we want to monitor the health of the asset. This is a technique that's been around for quite some time, but it's still very powerful because if we think about recency and frequency, recency is still a powerful variable. It's not the only variable, but it's still a very powerful variable in retail and most businesses. And what this means is months recency since the customer's last purchase. And throughout the decades, we've always known that recency is inversely correlated to propensity to buy. So the more recently someone has purchased, the more likely they are to buy. And then recency it extends out as time goes on and customers become less recent. At some point, every business has to decide at what point how do we define attrition for our business. So in this case, once a customer has not purchased for 13 or more months, it's defined as attrition, and then there may be a very specific effort to go back and reanimate those customers, bring them back into the life cycle. If we talk about frequency, this is just very straightforward, frequency of purchase. This table, so basically what this table is for our segment A, as an example, for a month, let's say the month of April, we would say every single customer and prospect in our database is mapped to this grid, right? And obviously, we would love to have every customer in the upper left, 5+ frequency, 0 to 3 month recency, right? Those are the people who are really engaged and active with us. But we know that's not the case. And as every month we produce this report, we gain insight into how this asset is performing month to month over time. And then, and every cell has its own detailed set of attributes for that cell that vary across these cells, right? Now, typically, there's one of the other variables is called monetary value, how much a customer spends with you. This is typically not directly, correlated necessarily to frequency and recency, but it's obviously, important in terms of how we start valuing customers and monitoring the change in customer lifetime value of our asset over time. So each cell has, a full profile, and this varies across the grid. When we think about, as if more and more of our customers are not buying, then their recency is increasing, and that's a sign that something is changing. Is it becoming more healthy in terms of recency and frequency, static, or is it becoming less healthy? If we think about, the 1,000 people in the 3-time purchase, 10 to 12 month cell, as soon as they buy, they move to the cell in the 4-time purchase, 0 to 3 months. So customers move through this grid on a month-to-month basis. And as you start to kind of monitor those changes with net flows in and out of cells, you can start to understand, is this strategic data asset becoming more healthy or less healthy over time? So this is kind of a way of essentially monitoring the health of the asset. And frequency and recency are just two variables. You could do this with other variables that may be more relevant to your particular organization. So to wrap up, in terms of taking action, I mean, certainly you want to be developing your strategic data assets, right? What are you doing in terms of analytics, data science, and really driving value from those assets? Then evaluating your acquisition engine. Are you running one of these mindless acquisition engines that I'm experiencing as a customer, or are you much more experienced? Is it integrated with a more, a more developed customer acquisition plan? Where are your best customers coming from? Part of that acquisition is if you're driving low-cost leads or low-value leads, they're just going to be, flying out the other end of your asset. Define and track and analyze customer lifetime value. There are many ways to do this. There's tons of articles and show how-tos to do this on the web. And what kind of marketing and support costs are you willing to put into every single customer? And then think about customer attrition. We come back to that original statistic of increasing your retention by 5% can really increase your margin. So when are your customers calling it quits? There's these things called purchase windows. So every business is different, but how long is a period of inactivity for your business before you consider that customer lost? And then what are you going to do to specifically target and to reanimate that customer? And how much are you willing to invest in that? So, getting to understand this full customer life cycle, the customer life cycle must be integrated if you're really going to start measuring customer lifetime value and acting on it and driving ROI. And lastly, I just want to talk a little bit about kind of what we call our Fast Start Retail Analytics program. Fast Start is really about making sure that a project or an engagement with us is a success. So the idea is to say, we want to really maximize your chance to work with eCapital on an analytics project. We really want to focus on maximizing your success ROI for the project. We don't want to wait for the data to be ready. We think about really paralleling data science development, analytics development with existing IT development, because the data are never ready. We found that out. You can't wait for the data. It's something that has to be done in parallel. We look at phased solution roadmaps where we're starting very quickly with get some data, get some real results early on, very little risk to the client, and then the roadmaps to say, okay, now that we've proven some concepts, we can move into some pilots and some solution that's become much more impactful on your business. We find this process works really well. And we can help in a number of ways. We have a great retail advisory team, very experienced experts in this space, retail analytics, and then, of course, predictive solutions. So I'm going to wrap it up there, and thank you for joining us.